What is up, you sexy YouTube mother lovers? You've already seen the title, so you know what time it is. Yes, you hungry heathens, it's time for our mandatory quarterly AK-50 update. AK-50, number 1. Alright, this is the last test of the AK-50 V1. The bolt and carrier actually run a hell of a lot smoother than they did on the V1. And I think it's just going to turn out to be, just superior on pretty much all fronts, just from cost, from manufacturing to weight. So I know what you're probably thinking. Brandon, you're doing an AK-50 update, which means you probably couldn't think of another idea for content today, could you? Well, right as you may be, you inquisitive assholes, something actually cool has happened fairly recently in the AK-50 project that is worthy of an update. So I don't do these more often, because I don't want to do AK-50 updates because I know they'll rack in those sweet views and climb those subscribers. But I don't want to just make videos for the sake of saying, we didn't forget and we're still thinking about it. So I usually wait until something happens or we make a big design decision or parts came in, and that's what happened this time. Parts came in for the new prototype. Not just did parts come in that look like the old stuff you've seen before, we actually have something kind of new that we've been working on. It's pretty nifty and I can't wait to show you guys how it works. But first, ad time. If you're wondering what allows us to keep making parts for the AK-50 and keep doing videos like this, it's sponsors like Big Daddy Unlimited. Big Daddy Unlimited, I feel like I'm contractually obligated to say, is like the Costco of the gun world. You guys got mad at me last time, I forgot that. Basically, it's an online subscription service where you can sign up under my code, of course, in the description and in the pinned comment, and you can get exclusive deals on ammo, guns, accessories, pretty much pay to get it at dealer pricing. At least here in the US, guns and ammo and whatnot are really starting to get hard to find. Like, it's really drying up with all the stuff going on. See, YouTube, I didn't say it. They still have some stuff in stock though, so if you want to go check them out, the link is in the description and in the pinned comment. They're a huge supporter of the channel, so I did want to thank them very much. And after you go sign up for them, we can get back to the AK-50 stuff. You're supposed to. So what we're going to be talking about today is the rear trunnion. Now, if you don't know what the rear trunnion is on an AK, let me show you. Excuse me while I just pull an AK out of my ass. So the rear trunnion is this piece here. These two rivets right here. On the AKMs, it's 2 long rivets, 74 style or 100 series stuff. You have 2 short rivets and 1 long rivet there in the top rear. But what the rear trunnion does on the AK is it holds the stock to the receiver. It is what you screw the stock into, but it does a little bit more than that. It also holds the recoil spring. So you see up there, the recoil spring is locked in into this rear trunnion, as well as being the stopper for that bolt carrier. So if the bolt carrier cannot go too far, this is basically just a piece of steel in the back that, as the recoil spring slows it down, at the very end, can smack a hold of the rear trunnion. It just stops it from going too far or becoming a projectile and enlarging your eye holes prematurely. Prematurely, as if there was a proper time to do that. So outside of the gun, we actually have an AKM rear trunnion here. This is what it looks like. You have, like I said, 2 long rivets here that go all the way through. The only thing long rivet means is that it goes through from one side of the receiver to the other, and you kind of crush the rivet. Instead of against one side of the receiver and 1 piece of trunnion, you're crushing it in the middle of 2 pieces of receiver, so theoretically stronger. Yeah, nothing too crazy. AKM rear trunnion. Now what I'm going to show you next is a PKM rear trunnion. Now, PKM, or the PKM, is a 7.62 by 54R. Big boy, heavy-duty machine gun. You've probably seen it in Modern Warfare or whatever it is you kids are playing these days, but it's a big boy machine gun. Been in service a little while, and one of the later designs of Mikhail Kalashnikov. As you can see, there's a pretty sizable difference between the two. Although I will say that this one looks a little bit beefier than it really is, because these are tangs. These are stock tangs. This is where the stock screws into. But this part here, this is the beef of the rear trunnion, the part that actually does the job of, being the backbone of the gun, making sure that the bolt and carrier don't, as I mentioned before, projectile through to the shooter's shoulder, which is kind of a feature. So here's your PKM rear trunnion. Let me introduce you to the prototype AK-50 rear trunnion. This thing's fucking huge. I almost dropped it. That is a beautiful, beautiful piece of machining. I feel like people forget the scale of the AK-50 sometimes. They feel like it's just, make AK longer and put 50 cal in it with Barrett mag. No, it's not quite that simple. Otherwise, I would have done it 3 fucking years ago. AKM Rear Trunnion. AK-50 Rear Trunnion. I know what you guys are thinking, and trust me, I've been thinking the same thing. Damn, boy, he's thick! Just now, let me explain some of its features. So what we actually have here is a 2-piece assembly. So we have the main meat of the rear trunnion, where we have 5 long rivets that go all the way through and are countersunk to hell for extra strength. We have these side slots here that are actually going to be for our prototype sheet metal receiver, or stamped receiver. Like we talked about in the last update, we are going stamped on the new prototype just because we feel like we can. And I just think it's going to be really cool to have the AKM-50, right? So the rails are going to fit right in under there, and of course that's where it's going to be riveted to the receiver. When I say rails, by the way, I mean the curved top pieces of the stamped receiver itself. It's where it's going to fit in there quite nicely, I hope. So what we have here in the second piece is the part that the recoil springs actually fit into. So as you see here, and this is where kind of in past models, we have a dual recoil spring assembly where we will sit our AK style springs right there next to each other. And something neat that we were kind of experimenting around with is having a buffer system in the rear trunnion of the AK-50, where the 50 BMG has kind of a wide range of loads, where you have, your standard ball, you have maybe your hotter stuff, your hunting loads, your Hornady AMAX, you have all sorts of stuff. Ralphus rounds, if you're a G like that. But you could be running standard ball ammo and then run heavy, supercharged loads, or you could be running it with a suppressor. There's all sorts of stuff, and yes, you can run 50 BMG suppressed. I've done it, it's rad. There's all sorts of variables that make this thing very prone to potentially overgassing, or at least having gas issues. What we kind of came up with was a system where we have a floating rear trunnion here that fits in its own little channel. And it's actually really cool because there's not a lot of side-to-side play in this as it is, but with that rail there, it's going to sit in the same rail as the bolt carrier does. And so it's going to be riding right alongside of it. So as it sits in its forwardmost position and the bolt carrier comes back, I have a 3D printed model here, the bolt carrier comes back and hits it, it's going to, ideally, if it's gassed properly, just barely kiss that and then go back forward into battery. But if you are running it hot, you're running it suppressed, you're running it, basically you're overcharging the gun. Instead of just smacking the rear and beating the shit out of the gun and then reducing the service life or potentially causing issues, there's all sorts of nasty stuff that can happen. What we're going to have is basically a second spring in the rear that is, a lot tighter, a lot more aggressive than, all right, let me rephrase that. So you're going to have a tighter wound spring right back there. It's actually going to be on kind of a buffer, like a stem in the middle. It's going to be a complicated assembly. I don't have all the parts here in front of me, but we had some 3D printed prototypes that seemed to work pretty decent. So we went ahead and had this machined. But when it bottoms out and it still has more energy, like let's say you're running it hot, you're running it suppressed, you're being an idiot with Grandpappy's Pissin' Hot reloads. This goes all the way back, it bottoms out, still has more energy left. It can go comfortably into that second spring and have a lot more resistance to it. So it's going to be fighting it a lot more, but it's not just going to immediately bottom out steel on steel, and then it can push it back forward, and then the gun cycles as it should. Do we need it? I'm not sure. Am I kind of glad we're working on it? Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty neat. Just listen. That's that sweet stirring the macaroni sound that your mom and her new boyfriend makes. I'm sure you're familiar. We had some old prototypes, kind of you can see early versions of when we were trying this. We originally tried doing the same thing with the spring in the middle with like a T-slot up top, kind of like a big AK recoil spring assembly, just like the original AKM. I thought that would be a cool look, but it ended up being a little bit more complicated than I would have liked, and it just seemed like there's a lot of places where there could be resistance, and it just... that and complications in machining. I don't know. I feel like this would have been a massive part to machine. Anytime you're machining anything out of a piece of billet steel, you are required to have a piece of steel, unless you're special cutting steel for it. But generally, if you just have a block of steel that is as big as the farthest dimension. So instead of having just a piece of steel this thick, or a piece of steel this thick, you'd have to have a piece of steel that is that thick entirely and just mill all of this away to be able to get to this. So it's a little bit more complicated, more expensive to machine. We figured that this was probably the best way to go about it. Or at least for now. I could be totally fucking wrong, but we'll see. So this is all pretty much ready to go into our new prototype stamped receiver, which is gonna look ghetto as shit, and it's gonna look straight out of Fallout, but if it works, I really don't care. It's gonna be fucking beautiful to me. As far as what's coming next, what's next to do, right now, here's our, like I showed you, the 3D printed prototype of the new bolt and carrier assembly. Just gonna have this machined. I think we're almost done with that. We've got a couple tweaks left to make. We're gonna have to send that off to get machined. That's why people ask, like, where's the AK-50? It's like, well, there's like 2 or 3 months at a time. It's very expensive to do. Like, this is a passion project at this point. We have never taken pre-orders on the AK-50. We don't have any GoFundMes. I don't want to do that. It's a passion project. I don't feel any pressure if there's not people that are waiting on, well, I paid for an AK-50, or I gave this much money. That's why I've never done it. So I prefer to keep it that way, even if it does lead to a couple of months of waiting around or waiting for parts to come in and such. Kind of like the rear trunnion assembly. But I feel a little bit more relaxed, and you'll never get an AK-50 if I fucking die of a heart attack before we ever get there. You laugh. I've been close. So, but next up is the bolt and carrier assembly. We're going to get this machined, and from then on, I think after we rivet our front trunnion assembly, which you saw again in previous videos, we finish our stamped receiver, we rivet in the rear trunnion assembly, buffer assembly, and get this new thing ready to be installed. Honestly, I feel like we might be able to have that gun functioning fairly soon. It's just we're moving at the speed that we can get parts in, is what it comes down to. But I hope you guys genuinely enjoyed this long video of just me rambling about machining and 3D prints and parts and showing you light machine gun parts and just generally talking nonsense. I showed you my light machine gun, please respond. But yeah, hopefully a lot of you guys that are interested in the weapon design portion of this, or the guys who are just interested in the status of the AK-50 project, hopefully this was cool for you guys. I know it's cool to me. I don't get to work on this stuff very often. I've got the company side of things, the running the business, the doing all the content on YouTube, and I love it to death. This is the stuff that I really like working on. So anytime I get to come around and talk to you guys about this, it's where my heart's at, so I enjoy it. Anyway, guys, that's pretty much it. Yeah, I guess I will talk to you sexy YouTube mother lovers in the next video. Thanks, guys. The bolt has gone forward. The weapon has fired.